You're watching The Legal Breakdown. So Glenn, Trump has been hard at work attempting now to just stop the D.C. trial altogether from proceeding. What's the news here on that effort?
So Donald Trump's mouthpieces, his lawyers, filed what I will generously call a frivolous motion. That's the nicest thing I can say about it. They've asked Judge Chutkan to just throw out the case in its entirety. Why? Well, because they claim that a president of the United States has absolute immunity. He can commit any and all crimes while in office, and he cannot be prosecuted. Here's the thing, Brian. You can read that 50-plus page motion front to back and back to front. There is not a single shred of supporting law, no precedent, no court has ever ruled that a president has absolute immunity from prosecution. What they do is they point to the civil law. The civil law does say, you can't just go around willy-nilly suing a president for money damages for actions he takes that are within the scope of his presidency. He does have immunity for that. But those cases, that precedent says nothing about a president who commits crimes in office. At its core, this is 50 pages worth of Donald Trump pulling out the old Richard Nixon line and dusting it off and trying to use it. That infamous line is, if the president does it, it's not illegal. Guess what? That dog won't hunt, not in Judge Tanya Chutkan's courtroom and not anywhere else.
Glenn, was there any indication from Judge Chutkan that she's growing tired of these delay tactics?
Not yet. And you know what? They filed this motion. And, in a criminal case, you have sort of broad leeway to file any motion you want to file that might have some merit to it. And let me take Donald Trump's side of things for a minute, even though it makes me really uncomfortable and I tend to break out in hives when I do it. Because this is a maiden voyage, criminally prosecuting a former president of the United States, there are some novel legal issues here. And so what the defense is trying to do by file this motion, even though it's a sure loser, is preserve the issue for appeal. Because if you don't raise the issue in the trial court, you can't raise it up on the appeal. So what they want to do is try to bubble this issue up to the ultimately the Supreme Court, where I don't believe for a minute it's going to get any play. But they're saying, look, this is a novel issue. We have to make the motion. We have to preserve it. So maybe we can get the Supreme Court or a justice or two of the Supreme Court to try to take an interest in it.
Well, if to your point, if he's filing what are on their face frivolous motions, will he eventually be sanctioned, or are these just all valid processes that the court has to avail him of? Because, I ask because it's starting to seem as though he's pushing the limits here for a while.
Yeah, that's a good question. In civil litigation, when, somebody is suing something else and one party files frivolous motion after frivolous motion, ordinarily a judge will grow tired of it. The judge will warn the party or the lawyers for the party, stop filing frivolous motions. And if you don't, I'm going to sanction you. That's something we see more frequently in civil litigation. We don't see it that often in criminal litigation, frankly, because attorneys don't often, file, lots of frivolous motions in criminal litigation. So I don't think they have reached the point where the judge is going to shut them down from filing any more motions or threaten to sanction them, again, in part because of the novel circumstances of this case. But I would also suggest they probably don't want to push their luck with Judge Chutkan.
Well, are there more opportunities for him to try and delay here?
Yeah, so here's what he's going to do. Judge Chutkan, I predict, will just summarily deny this motion. And whereas, Brian, I usually tell our viewers to pull up the motion and read it for themselves, I'm not going to recommend that anybody spend any time reading this nonsense from Donald Trump's lawyer. In fact, when I was reading it, I could almost feel my brain cells dying and hitting the floor. That's how absurd so many of these arguments were. They actually made an argument saying that because Donald Trump was impeached and he went to trial before the Senate and the Senate didn't convict him and didn't remove him from office, there is some sort of magical, unknown, unwritten, and before now unseen double jeopardy that attaches. It was such a laughably contorted interpretation of the impeachment clause in the Constitution, that all of this will be, virtually laughed out of court.
That suggests that they think that that an impeachment trial in the U.S. Senate is somehow a criminal trial, like as if they're the same thing. That's the first thing, which of course is not the case. The second thing is the first thing that Mitch McConnell said after voting to acquit him was that he should still be prosecuted criminally. So if he's pointing to that instance, if he's pointing to what happened in the Senate, I don't think that's going to redound to his benefit.
Yeah, Brian, I think you just passed the law class that Donald Trump's lawyers failed. Obviously, an impeachment proceeding, it's not a proceeding in a court of law. It has no precedential implications. There are no double jeopardy concerns that attach to an impeachment hearing. And you're exactly right. Mitch McConnell and others have said Donald Trump can and perhaps should be held accountable in a court of law. And that is precisely where he is right now. And to go back to the question that I think I neglected to answer, what kind of delay might Donald Trump win as a result of filing this motion? Well, Judge Chutkan will deny it. It will go up to the D.C. Federal Circuit Court of Appeals. They will probably summarily deny it as well. They will affirm Judge Chutkan's denial. And then Donald Trump can try to bubble it up to the Supreme Court. He can ask them to review it, but I predict they will refuse to review it. But here's the thing, Brian. There's not a lot about the Supreme Court that leaves me confident these days, but I am confident about one thing. The right-wing bloc of the Supreme Court love their superior status. They love to put themselves above all else, including the rules of ethics. And the last thing they will ever do, in my opinion, is rule that an aspiring dictator like Donald Trump is so above the law that he can commit any and all crimes he wants while in office with impunity and absolute immunity. Why? Because if they ruled that way, then Donald Trump could, for example, if he got back into the Oval Office, he could order the illegal detention of all Supreme Court justices that he doesn't like. And the Supreme Court would say, oh, well, he's immune from prosecution. He's above the law. There's nothing we can do about it. The Supreme Court loves its supreme status, and they will not, in my opinion, enable an aspiring dictator to get back into the Oval Office, because a dictator will have absolutely no use for a Supreme Court.
Perfectly put. Let's end with this, Glenn. Do you still believe that this case will go to trial in March of 2024 based on the track we're on now?
I do, because remember, Judge Chutkan put Donald Trump on notice. If you continue to do things that interfere with the due administration of justice, if you continue to do things that could be interpreted as harassing or intimidating or threatening the witnesses, if you continue to do things that could poison the future jury pool in this case, you know what I'm going to do? I will consider moving the trial date up and taking you to trial even earlier than March 4th of 2024. And of course, since that time, Brian, Donald Trump has harassed and intimidated any number of witnesses, up to and including calling for the execution of an important witness against him, General Mark Milley. I will take Judge Chutkan at her word that she will absolutely hold firm on the trial date, or make it even earlier. All
right, well, seems like a good place to leave off. So for anybody watching, if you want to stay on top of this stuff as it continues to break, make sure to subscribe. The links are right here on the screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.